it tells you about the explosion on the back of the map. And that means a lot because it tells you how serious it was. It wasn't anything play with it or anything. Anyway, thank goodness my family lived through it and we got through it. And the only one hurt was Betty. She cut her finger when she was pulling glass out of the living room wall. So we had one casualty there. And I'll go on to tell you the others. But anyway, I'll tell you about that night and the way things went. A lot of these stories start out with, I say a ghost story starts out with it was a dark and dreary night. But it wasn't. It was kind of moonlight. And this was December the 9th, 1970. And it was not 10:30, but it was getting close to 10:30, and I think I was done with the news. We always had the news on. And I heard this roar outside. And I thought, oh, an airplane flying too low. Well, I went to the window, and the roar stayed the same. It didn't get any different. So I thought, uh-oh, I'd like to go to bed, but I better go out and see what's going on. So I got out on the lawn, and over to my right, I could see a cloud coming up a creek. We had a creek in a distance there. And I could just see that cloud rolling up that creek. And that's when this story on the gas line comes in. Because in an instant, I knew exactly what was going on and what to expect and what to do and what not to do. And what not to do is, well, like it says in there, you don't drive your car into a cloud of smoke. It'll explode. So I went into the house and told Betty, there's going to be an explosion. We got to get out. Well, she didn't give me any argument. Thank goodness. We got all the kids out. And she called two of our neighbors, and I was going to go across the street and tell our neighbors. About that time, her brother, Al Menner, he come down the road, and he pulled in there, and he was telling them. So we went all up to Sand Hill, and Sand Hill is on your map. And that's where we experienced the explosion. But anyway, her sister came over to our car to talk to us after we parked up there. And there was 3 or 4 cars up there. I don't know, everybody get out. So when the explosion went off, her sister fell to the ground. That's how. But I think the main force went over us. So we were lucky. We didn't feel a whole lot, but we did feel something. And the explosion looked exactly like, and I thought of that right away, like the atomic bomb. You see pictures of the atomic bomb over in Japan that went off. A great big mushroom cloud. And that's exactly what it looked like. And it must have been awful high. Because some of the papers from Mr. Menner's business, he had a business going, landed in Berger, Missouri. And there was other papers 3-4 miles from there. So at this time, let's see, I have to maybe go with some of my notes. But let me tell you about propane. Propane going through that pipe was liquid. And when it hits the air, it turns into vapor. Now, you can imagine 1 square foot of liquid turns into 270 square feet of vapor. And that's what you burn or use out here. Now, it's one thing about propane is non-toxic. It dissipates. It's no ashes, no nothing. You know, that's fine. Now, the smell, there was no smell then because it was out of the pipeline. The smell gets put into it at the terminal before it goes out to the different various stations. So that's where the smell comes from. So they do that on purpose. Now propane, also, you could tell by that experience we had there, is heavier than air. So it settles down into a low place. And that's exactly what it did. The vapor and the propane, or whatever it is, it's a half a pound heavier than a pound of air. If there, I don't know how you measure a pound of air. Anyway, it turns into vapor at 44 degrees. I just take my, I mean, I don't know about that, but that's what they tell us. So that's the some of the attributes of propane. Now, propane is made from crude oil, and it's made at the refineries, same refineries where they make gas and oil and diesel and things like that. And it's somewhat of a byproduct of making gas. I don't know how that works. But anyway, you should know about propane. Now oh yeah, I really need notes because, man, there's lots of stories here. And I'm sure there's lots of stories out in the audience, but I don't know if we'll have time to hear them all. So anyway, we were pretty shook up on the hill there. Everybody, you know, what are you going to do? Nobody knows what to do. So we thought, well, we could find a telephone. So we went down the road to about a mile and went in this, stopped at this house and knocked at the door and see if I could use their telephone. And they were scared. You could tell. They were, I don't know what. But they said, no, I couldn't come in. So we didn't get any telephone. So I didn't know the people, but I kind of sympathized with them because they were probably scared to death.
Yeah.
So then we came back, and from then I just got a whole bunch of little things I can tell you about the explosion that and the people involved in it. And that's when I need to start on my notes, because I don't want to tell you something that's out of line. I mean, I'm trying to go down the line. This happened, and finally we got a settlement. That's the last thing that happened. So Al had called the sheriff office at 10:33, and the explosion went off at 10:42 to 10:45. They're not sure. So you can see he hustled, we hustled, everybody got out of there fast, and for some reason nobody dilly-dallied or asked any questions. We just went. So the deputies showed up about then. They blocked all the roads off. There would be three roads they would block off, or three directions. And I know we were over at Bruni's, and Bruni is on the map there. He's a dairy farmer up in the corner. And people would come from New Haven, and I think they were bumper to bumper, it looked to me like. And Bruni's had a big area, kind of a lot by their house. So the deputies had them go around, go back to New Haven. So, and I imagine that happened at the other stops too, because they wouldn't let anybody through. So the deputies got on the ball, and they were out there fast, and I understand Washington Fire Department was out there pretty fast too, because they were having a meeting that night, and the call came in, so they were ready to go. So that all helps. Now, yeah, I have to look at my notes because what I want to say next. There was 10 people went to the hospital, but only one was badly hurt, and that was Dorothy Clipchamp. She had a cut on her cheek and neck a little bit, and the reason she got that was they heard an explosion, got out of bed, walked up to the window to see what was going on, and guess what? The window came in on them, and she was the only one of this terrible explosion that really got hurt to speak of. The others were dismissed at the hospital. It was, maybe they had a scratch, maybe they were scared to death. I think that was it mainly. So anyway, let's see, I was going to ask Sylvester Boland, he ain't here, is he? I was going to tell his story, or have him tell his story, so I guess I'll tell it. That night, they were babysitting for some of their neighbors. So Dennis Boland, he was 13 years old at the time. By the way, my son was 13 years old at the time too, Terry. And he had to sleep out in the living room by the window, so they threw a mattress out there, and he was laying on that mattress. And Father Morris, right there, by the way, the church and the school got a lot of damage too. I won't go into all that. But he laid, Father Morris came by and he noticed him laying there. He says, "What's that? What are you doing that for?" He says, "Come over to the house, I got a spare room." So they said, okay. So they went over to the house, and by the time, I think the explosion went off when they started to walk in the front door. But anyway, later on, there was slivers of glass in that mattress. And I think there was one big one. Probably would have really got him. So anyway, there's a miracle of the story right there. So, oh yeah. Another little story is kind of funny. John Boland's, we had called them, and they skedaddled and got in the car, all except, what was it, Barb? Was it Barb right there? Yeah. She was just coming out the door, and an explosion came, and the door knocked her backwards. And maybe she thought she was hurt, I don't know, but she's doing fine now. But anyway, the door knocked her down. Anyway, they went up to Grandpa's and my uncle, and said, well, we got to get out of here. There's an explosion. Uncle John said, well, it exploded once. It ain't going to explode again. I'm going back in the house. So there's wisdom for you. But everybody else was shook up, and you can't. What do you do? It's like a bunch of, like a fox jumping into a hen house, I guess. What do you do? So anyway, let's see, what's next on the list? Okay, we got that story. Well, we stayed at Bruni's that night, and then for 2 days we stayed with my mother, who lives near Buford. So we were out of our house 2 or 3 days or 4, who knows, you don't remember all this stuff. But anyway, there was Leonard Bruni was the son of the Brunis there, and when we went there, he came up to the car and he started talking, and I don't know what he said. I was going to try to remember what he said, but he was in shock. So that's how bad it really was. He just didn't make no sense at all. He was just nuts, you know. And while he was talking, I said, I'm going to try to remember this. I can't remember what he said because it didn't make any sense. So now to go into a little history, there was 2 fires at this place before. One before Mr. Minner bought the place, and then right after he bought the place, they had a Christmas fire, a New Year's Eve fire. Christmas tree caught on fire, burned the house down to the ground. Betty won't like this, but her mom was in the living room, you know, watching television, and she had a little baby. She had her younger sister with her, and she hollered in the kitchen, said, "Betty, bring some water." And Betty says, "Hot or cold?" But anyway, after that, so he built a different house, and he built it out of stone and steel because he wasn't going to have another fire. So you know the rest of the story there. So that was the new house blew up. Now, by the way, Mr. Minner, he was in St. Louis that night. He did not come out that night. The next morning he came out, and guess what? He got a speeding ticket.
Oh.
That's just one of the little things.
And
Robert Minner, which is Betty's brother, he was in Peevely, Missouri. He felt the blast and heard something about Port Hudson and this and that. So he came out there that night to see what was going on. But can you imagine, he felt the blast in Peevely, Missouri. Now, John Boland had dairy cows, and Mr. Minner had 10 horses. They all made it real good, but the cows went over the hill. They disappeared. They had a big pasture in the back and woods, so they were gone. So the next morning he didn't milk because there was no cows around. It took a while for him to settle down. So that's just some of the stories that come out. The other thing was that night, there was firemen, there was everybody around, and deputies and whatever. And I knew about these one neighbors lived back over there. They were bachelors, actually. So I thought, well, we better go back there and look. I don't want to look, but we better go back there and see what's going on. So me and somebody else, and you're excited, I don't know who it was, we went back there together. We got there, and there was no roof on the house. It was an old wooden house. The roof was gone. I don't know where it went. So there was some outside steps going into the second floor. So I went up those steps, and there was 2 beds empty. They were, stationed apart. But there was 2 bachelors lived there, and they were gone. So we went back home. We thought that was all right. We had no idea where they were, but they weren't in bed. So, so that was that. Everybody here in Washington knows Chief Menifee that retired, I think in July. Now, he lived about 4 or 5 miles from us, and he said he had told me that he felt the shock. He happened to be up at 10:30, and he said, "Boy, things really rattled there." So then Betty's sister across the road, that made it up to Sand Hill too. Her house was pretty well damaged, and Al Minner's house was really damaged. That was one of the worst damages that you could fix up. I mean, the ones down the valley you couldn't fix up. But anyway, they had the roof must have came off and then fell down again. So they had to jack up the roof to get it in line when they repaired the house. Just some little tidbits that you should know about. Then we had the next day or so, I think, yeah, when Mr. Minner was out there, he had a friend show up, so-called friend, and he was going to guard the place and stop looters and, you know, not have everybody come around, so he was going to stay there. Well, I don't know how long he stayed there, but the next day or two he wasn't there. But also, we had a freezer full of meat, and the meat was all gone. Oh. And that's when you have bad luck, and then somebody comes along and kicks you, you know. So, and Mrs. Minner had a piggy bank in her bedroom full of quarters. So, sometime later, we went up there to sift through the stuff and see if we could find them. We never did find them, but I imagine this guy found them. So, he got, yeah, what a dirty trick. Anyway, he got that, and goodness knows what else he took, but there wasn't much to take. Anyway, but people came around, but I don't think anybody came around with the idea of stealing anything. So, the next Saturday, a bunch of guys got together, and Mr. Minner, and they picked up a whole wagon load of broken lumber up west of the house that blowed in this field, just to show you how bad it was. Then one of the things, well, Phillips Pipeline, they set up an office in Union to take care of all these small claims. In the meantime, they ignored us, and we got nothing. In fact, they really ignored us. So there was nothing there. So finally we got a settlement, but it was a long time ago. So Mr. Minner, he has a couple of famous quotes. He said, Sunday we go to church, Monday we start rebuilding. So that's the kind of guy he was. Let's see, I got his picture back there. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's a real nice picture of him. And also he wrote an editorial to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about this situation, and I guess he didn't have too much nice to say about Phillips either. And in there he said, another one of his quotes, that Mr. Gilley was the previous owner, and in 1930 he sold this right-of-way, which would have been about 2 acres, it's through the whole farm, to Phillips Pipeline for $57 for an eternity. So that was his words. He used eternity, which is right. It's still there. You know, they got that easement through there for $57. But that was 1930, so you could put some figures to it, I guess, if you want. Then Mr. Minner had to get a lawyer because Phillips wasn't very friendly. And that went on. We finally got a settlement a year and 3 months afterwards. They had a hearing in St. Louis. I remember I got, a lot of the kids got on the stand, you know, I guess for sympathy, because it scared the heck out of them. But they got me on the stand, and they asked me how many children I had and what their birthdays were, or how old they were. And boy, I thought, I hadn't been thinking about that, but I got through it, and I was, I did all right. And that's all they asked. It was just a hearing, amounted to nothing. Why not just come around a year earlier and say we'll give you this many $1,000. So anyway, all in all, we got paid, but we didn't get any punitive damages. And maybe they never heard of that word years ago, but you hear about it all the time now. Punitive damages, they really up it. But we got nothing, but we did get a settlement. And anyway, yeah, they made, I guess this was the lawyer's idea, they made Mr. Minner write down every item that they lost. They had an attic upstairs. Betty's wedding dress was there. It ended up in a tree out there. Anyway, there was a lot of things like that they, what do you put in the attic? Things you forgot about.
Yeah.
So they had to make a list of everything. And I guess when Phillips looked at that list, they threw it in the wastebasket. But anyway, that's what they had to do. And that was quite a job. They'd think of something today and then write it down, and then tomorrow you think of something else. All that, and went on and on. I guess, the other thing was, there was quite a bit of damage in Washington, Missouri. Drogy's 3 front windows got broken out, great big windows. And there was more damage than I guess we even heard of. There was a piece in the paper about who all had broken windows. I think it was all broken windows. Now, I didn't hear anything about Marthasville or Dutzel, but do you happen to know how Dutzel got its name? I do. Back in the 1860s and 70s, there was a general store there, like in a lot of these settlements. And of course they had a pot-bellied stove. And these guys were sitting around the stove talking every day. And one guy, he had said, they're going to put a railroad out here. And they're setting ties out here and rails. They're laying a railroad, and this is going to be a hopping place. And we don't even have a name. And this other old gentleman, he kind of broken English, he says, "Oh, that's so?" You're not laughing.
I knew what you were going to say.
You heard it before.
But I knew what you were going to say.
Well, the only other thing I've got to say is we got those things in the back that you can read layouts on the tables and different things here. It would be educational to look at them. And one thing you want to notice is that in 1970 they had ground beef for 49 cents. That's all I usually. Oh wait, we got a
question.
But
what caused the pipeline to leak or break?
Oh, they had shut it off. I detected something, and they shut it off at Villa Ridge, or they had another stop at Rosebud, and somehow that built up so many units of pressure, more than it was used to. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was enough. And the split was 6 foot long, they said. And it was on the ground part, but still, you know, it gets away from it. But that's what it was. It was a little bit.
They'd go over every 2 weeks and check that pipeline.
Yeah.
And they knew
With an
there was a
airplane.
split in it and it was gonna blow.
Really?
Yeah. But they put that extra pressure on it. I don't know how that happened, but they did. And whether they thought they had a leak and they shut one off and the other one built up or something like that. I think that's what happened.
How quickly did Phillips respond to it?
Oh, you know, I don't know, but the workers were out there right away. I talked to some of the workers, and they did the best they could. They did a good job. But they shut the line off in, let's see, it comes from Oklahoma or something. And they shut it off at Rosebud, so then, you know, they let it burn until it burnt out. And the pipeline explosion was as closest to Al Minter's house. And he looked out the window and he saw it, you know, so he evidently knew what to do too, so he did it. And that's how we, there's an article in there that says, in one of the papers, it said, he's credited with saving lives. Well, I don't doubt that a bit. For instance, you hear a lot of stories, and I guess everybody's got a story, but they tell me that there was some heavy object in our basement where our son was sleeping, our youngest son, and it fell across his bed and would have killed him, but he wasn't there. So that's how serious it was. So that's all I got, but I bet there's a bunch of stories. Yeah, Jeff?
Do you mind if I give a personal account of
Yeah, go ahead.
what happened that night?
Go ahead.
As,
Yeah, stand up, make yourself ugly or something.
I'll get up here. Bill's my uncle and a good friend. But in 1970, that December, so I was 11 years old. I was going to be 12 in January. Anyway, we were just finished the news, like Bill said. We started watching Johnny Carson. My 3 younger sisters were already upstairs, had gone to bed. My brother and I were in the living room. We got to stay up a little bit longer. Mom was making popcorn, which she did, brought it in. We started watching Johnny Carson. The phone rings. I don't remember if Mom or Dad answered it. I think it might have been my Aunt Betty, Bill's wife, who was making this call about getting out of the house. There's a gas exploded. As soon as, I think Mom yelled from the kitchen, "Johnny, get in here," to talk to Betty or Bill. And right after that, I knew there was panic in the house, and Dad was going to go outside because he needed to look or hear or verify or, you know. And so I went out the front door with him, and as soon as we got out the front door, the first thing we noticed was a super loud sound. It sounded like a jet was sitting on a runway waiting to take off, but had some throttle already pushed in. And you know, and it was, excuse me, I'll turn it so I don't do it. It was like that, continuous, super loud. And as we looked down towards the sound, out in front of our house, there's a valley that goes across our farm, down the next farm, big creek runs through there. And it was full of fog. And my dad says, "Oh my God." Because it wasn't just gray fog like you see, we know when the weather changes. It was as white as that door right there. It was pure white. And so he comes running, we run back in the house, and I just knew, Dad's scared, we gotta go. So we had a dairy farm. And we ran upstairs to get the girls up. And we got them downstairs, and we're putting coats on them. And we're in a front room, call it a mud room, a little coat room, whatever. And it had a window in it facing north, which is where all this was to our north and kind of northeast. And at the moment that it blew, thank God nobody was in front of that window. It was about 2 feet wide, 3 feet tall, because the glass from that window went through that mudroom, across the kitchen, and hit the refrigerator on the far wall, which is about 25 feet. So the girls and Mom, I think, were over by the big coat closet. I was behind a wall just around from the front door. I'm not sure where my brother Steve was. But no, my dad had just gone outside to start the car, and he said, on his way out, he said, "Get out here as soon as you can." And he was going down the sidewalk when it blew up. Two things happened. Immediately, it went completely dark, and then just like that, it was like morning light. And you could see everything out in front of you. And like Bill said, it was a mushroom cloud. You could see it going up and just billowing out. And we are screaming for our lives because it's dark, this noise, everything, ceilings are dropping. We're trying to run to the car, and there you could hear debris. All of our buildings had tin roofs, our house, our barn, our shed, our shop. Everything had tin, and you could hear debris hitting everything, falling out of the sky. And we're getting to the car, and there's Michelle, there's Julie, Steve, Jeff, John, Marlene. Where's Barbie? Barbie, where's Barbie? Okay, Bill had said that about the front door. The front door didn't just blow open. It blew off the hinges, and she was just coming around the corner, and it wedged like this on the corner of a wall, and she was down around underneath that open space behind it crying. That's how we found her. She was 4.
And she's here tonight.
And she's here to tell us. So we are running to the car. We are all crying. We think it's the end of the world. And we get in the car and we're driving out, and we just see this glow and this huge cloud forming over all of Franklin County. And we get up to my grandparents. They live right up the road, farm road from us, about a 5/10 of a mile. And like Bill said, we stopped. My grandma and grandpa, John and Cecilia Boland, came out. And my mom was saying, "Get in the car, get in the car." And we're going to Washington. And my grandpa says, "It's already exploded once. It's not going to explode again." we're staying. And I think my grandma Cecilia was just behind him, like over his shoulder. And I think she's like, "Well, I wouldn't mind getting in, but he says we're good." So we just anyway. So we go up our farm road, up the church road, and we get up on Highway C. And to get to Washington, you can either go through New Haven or you go through Croco or 185. And when we got up on Highway C, there was a column of fire, and it looked like it was 200 feet tall. That was the propane that was now had ignited, and now it was just like a big torch coming out of the ground under pressure. And you've seen the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston and the column of fire that held Pharaoh and the army back from when they were crossing the sea. That is what this looked like. It was a straight big cylinder of fire that went up hundreds of feet. And supposedly there's stories after that pilots up at KCI International, Kansas City International Airport, reported bright light coming from the east. And that's what they said it was this explosion and the fire. And so we didn't go down Highway YY. We stayed on Highway C and went to New Haven. And we stayed at my grandparents' for weeks, I guess, because every pane of glass on our farm was gone. And barn roofs were caved in, shop was caved in. My dad and grandpa rebuilt all that themselves. And I think as a settlement, I don't even think our family got $20,000. I want to say like 17 or 18,000. And my dad and grandpa rebuilt everything. We had plastic on our windows for the rest of the winter, and the next summer, I really don't know when it was all said and done, but.
In the fire department, the fire insurance wouldn't pay Dad because they said we did not have a fire.
No, yeah, it was. Yeah, so supposedly the valley was filling up because, like you said, it was heavier than air, and said that it backed up and probably into Betty's dad's house, you know, we heard that, well, somebody's pilot light probably ignited it, is what ignited it.
Hot water tank, yeah.
Or, yeah, off
Water head
so,
tank.
so that, and what Bill didn't say about Betty's mom and dad's house was after he built it the second time and made it out of stone and steel so it wouldn't burn down. Yeah, it didn't burn down. It was almost 100% shaved off at the ground. There was nothing left to it. And days and weeks later, when we were walking around looking at people's property, my aunts and I, we walked over onto the Mentor's place. And, you know, we were about 3/4 of a mile from the leak. They were about a 1/4 mile from the leak, and in the same, on the same side of the hill as the leak. And you've seen World War I movies and documentaries, and you see just barren ground with a stick of a tree here and with no limbs, you know, it's just black charred earth. That is exactly what the Mentor farm looked like. It was, every tree was just completely shaved off limbs. There was nothing there was no animals to be found. The ground was as bare as this floor. Anyway, my dad and I went back out there the next morning because obviously, you know, we had about 40 or 45 cows we had to milk, and there was no power. We were waiting for UE at the time, Ameren, to get power back on. We finally did milk about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The cows were all upset about that, pretty much. They were ready. We didn't lose any, but it was a long road back from that. It was.
Anybody got some good stories? So, you know what Woodpecker said? That's all, folks.